Security grabbed my arms in the middle of the executive board meeting. "Escort Ms. Rivera out." Immediately, CEO Richard Donovan commanded, his voice cutting through my presentation about the $47 million discrepancy I'd discovered in our quarterly reports. 50 executives watched as 2 guards lifted me from my chair, my laptop still projecting evidence of systematic fraud onto the screen behind me. I didn't struggle or shout. Instead, I smiled at Richard's panicked face and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "The SEC already has everything." His confident smirk vanished. The room erupted in chaos as the guards dragged me toward the door, but I caught the exact moment Richard realized I'd been 3 steps ahead all along. "My name is Sofia Rivera, and I'm 32 years old. Until 5 minutes ago, I was the Chief Financial Analyst at Donovan Tech Solutions, the company I'd helped build for 7 years. Richard thought he could silence me with humiliation and force. What he didn't know was that I'd filed a sealed whistleblower complaint with the Securities and Exchange Commission 3 months ago, complete with every document, email, and recording that proved his crimes. The file was set to unseal in 72 hours unless I stopped it. I had no intention of stopping anything. 3 months earlier, I noticed something wrong during a routine audit. Our third-quarter revenue reports showed $47 million in contracts that didn't match any client records I could find. At first, I thought it was a database error, something technical that IT could fix. I spent 2 weeks cross-referencing every number, checking backup files, and reviewing transaction histories. The contracts were real, signed, and processed through our system. But the companies listed as clients didn't exist. I searched business registrations, tax records, and corporate databases. Nothing. These weren't just missing files or clerical mistakes. Someone had created phantom companies and funneled millions of dollars through fake contracts. The signatures on every document belonged to Richard Donovan himself. I didn't confront him immediately. 7 years working directly under Richard had taught me to be careful. He was brilliant, charismatic, and absolutely ruthless with anyone who questioned his authority. I'd watched him destroy careers over minor disagreements, blacklist former employees throughout the industry, and rewrite history to make himself look like a genius while others took the blame for his mistakes. If I accused him without ironclad proof, I'd be fired before I could finish the sentence. So I started quietly gathering evidence. I worked late nights when the executive floor was empty, copying files to an encrypted external drive that I kept hidden in my apartment. Every fraudulent contract, every forged signature, every dollar that didn't belong, I documented everything. 2 weeks into my investigation, Richard's assistant Patricia knocked on my office door. "Richard wants to see you," she said, her expression carefully neutral. My heart pounded, but I kept my face calm. I grabbed my tablet and headed to his corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Richard sat behind his massive desk, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his smile warm and welcoming. "Sofia, close the door," he said pleasantly. I did, my mind racing through possibilities. Did he know what I'd found? Had someone reported my late-night file access? "I wanted to personally thank you for your dedication," he continued, gesturing for me to sit. "Your work on the quarterly reports has been exceptional. In fact, I'm promoting you to Senior Vice President of Finance. Significant raise, stock options, the works." I stared at him, caught completely off guard. "A promotion? Now? That's incredibly generous," I managed to say. Richard leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You've earned it, Sofia. You're exactly the kind of detail-oriented person this company needs. I trust you completely." The word trust hit me like a physical blow. He was either genuinely clueless about my investigation, or this was a test. I accepted the promotion with appropriate enthusiasm, thanked him profusely, and returned to my office shaking. That night, I contacted a securities lawyer specializing in corporate fraud. If Richard was trying to buy my silence or my loyalty, he just made his first major mistake. The promotion actually gave me access to even more restricted financial records, files that proved the fraud went back 3 years and totaled over $120 million. I documented all of it. My lawyer, Catherine Park, had worked on dozens of whistleblower cases. She listened to everything I'd found, reviewed my evidence, and gave me the harsh truth. "This is massive fraud," she said during our confidential meeting at her downtown office. "But if you go public without protection, Richard will destroy you and probably hide all the evidence before anyone can investigate. We need to file with the SEC under whistleblower protection statutes. It'll be sealed during their investigation, and if they find merit in your claims, you'll be protected from retaliation." She paused, studying my face. "But Sofia, this will end your career at Donovan Tech, probably your career in this city. Richard has powerful friends, and whistleblowers don't always get welcomed back with open arms." I thought about my 7 years at the company, the late nights, the sacrifices, the genuine pride I'd felt helping build something successful. Then I thought about the fraud, the stolen money, the investors being deceived. "File it," I told Catherine. We spent the next month preparing the complaint. Every piece of evidence had to be verified, authenticated, and properly documented. Catherine worked with a forensic accountant who confirmed what I'd found. Richard had been systematically creating fake contracts, routing company money through shell corporations, and pocketing the difference. The money went to offshore accounts, luxury properties purchased under different names, and cash payments that left no digital trail. It was sophisticated, carefully planned, and absolutely illegal. We filed the sealed complaint with the SEC on a Tuesday morning in early October. The file would remain confidential while federal investigators reviewed the evidence and decided whether to open a formal investigation. Catherine estimated it would take 3 to 4 months. In the meantime, she advised, act completely normal. Don't let Richard suspect anything. The element of surprise is your best protection. Acting normal became the hardest thing I'd ever done. I attended meetings where Richard presented fraudulent numbers to the board. I smiled and nodded during executive dinners where he toasted the company's success built on stolen money and fake contracts. I processed financial reports that I knew contained lies, all while documenting every new piece of evidence I found. My new position as senior vice president gave me access to Richard's personal financial accounts tied to the company. I discovered he'd purchased a beachfront mansion in the Cayman Islands, a penthouse in Manhattan, and a collection of luxury cars, all funded through the shell companies. He'd also been paying off 2 board members with cash bonuses that never appeared in official records. The corruption went deeper than I'd imagined. More people were involved, more money was stolen, more lies were told. Patricia, Richard's assistant, started acting strange around me. She'd worked for him for 5 years, longer than most people lasted in that position. One evening when we were both working late, she stopped by my office. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly, glancing down the hallway to make sure we were alone. "Of course," I replied, wondering if she somehow knew about my investigation. Patricia hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot of an email. It was from Richard to someone named Vincent Brooks, discussing the Rivera promotion and keeping her close until the audit cycle finishes. My blood turned cold. The promotion wasn't a reward. It was surveillance. Richard suspected something, and he'd promoted me to watch me more carefully. "How long have you known?" I asked Patricia carefully. She sat down across from my desk, looking exhausted. "I've known Richard was doing something illegal for 2 years, she admitted. "I handle his calendar, his emails, his expense reports. I've seen the fake contracts, the shell company payments, the offshore transfers. I kept quiet because I need this job and because Richard made it very clear what happens to people who cross him." She looked at me with desperate eyes. "But if you're investigating him, if you're planning to expose this, I want to help. I have copies of everything, emails he thought he deleted, recordings from meetings where he discussed the fraud with board members. I've been collecting evidence because I was too scared to use it alone." This was either a genuine offer of help or an elaborate trap. I studied Patricia's face, looking for deception. She looked terrified but determined. I made a decision. "I've already filed a whistleblower complaint with the SEC," I told her. "It's sealed right now, but when it opens, everything will come out. If you have additional evidence, my lawyer can add it to the file under your own whistleblower protection." Patricia's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. I thought I was going crazy, watching him steal and lie while everyone praised him as a genius. We met with Catherine Park the following weekend. Patricia's evidence was devastating: emails where Richard explicitly discussed creating fake companies, voice recordings from meetings where he instructed board members Vincent Brooks and Tyler Hamilton on how to hide the fraud, and bank records showing payments to both men. Catherine immediately filed an amended complaint including Patricia as a co-whistleblower. We now had 2 protected witnesses and enough evidence to put Richard in federal prison for decades. The next 2 months were tense. Richard increased his attention on me, constantly asking for updates on various financial reports, requesting meetings to discuss audit procedures, and questioning my work in ways he never had before. He was suspicious but couldn't quite figure out what I was doing. Patricia and I maintained careful distance at the office, communicating only through encrypted messages on a secure app Catherine had recommended. Meanwhile, the SEC investigation was progressing. Catherine received confirmation that federal investigators had verified our initial evidence and were expanding their inquiry. They'd subpoenaed bank records from the shell companies, interviewed several clients who'd been defrauded, and were building a criminal case. The sealed file would unseal once they had enough evidence to file formal charges. That date was set for January 15, 3 months away. Richard's behavior became increasingly erratic as the holidays approached. He snapped at executives during meetings, made impossible demands about year-end financial reports. During the company Christmas party, Richard pulled me aside in front of everyone and made a toast. To Sofia Rivera, he announced, raising his champagne glass, the most loyal and dedicated executive this company has ever had. I couldn't run Donovan Tech without her absolute integrity. Everyone applauded. I smiled and thanked him while my stomach churned. He was either genuinely clueless or sending me a message. Either way, I knew the confrontation was coming soon. The SEC had scheduled their final evidence review for early January. After that, the file would unseal and federal charges would be filed. January brought the breaking point. Richard scheduled a mandatory executive board meeting for January 10, 5 days before the file would unseal. The agenda listed Q4 financial review and 2024 projections. Catherine warned me this might be Richard's attempt to get me to sign off on fraudulent year-end reports, creating evidence that I'd approved the fake numbers. Don't sign anything, she instructed. If he pressures you, refuse politely and cite the need for additional verification. The SEC will unseal the file in 5 days. You just need to hold out until then. I arrived at the meeting prepared for confrontation. All 12 board members were present, including Vincent Brooks and Tyler Hamilton, who both avoided eye contact with me. Richard sat at the head of the table, looking confident and relaxed. Too relaxed. Thank you all for coming, Richard began. Today we'll be reviewing our extraordinary Q4 performance and discussing next year's aggressive growth targets. Sofia has prepared a comprehensive financial presentation. He gestured to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I stood and connected my laptop to the projector, pulling up the presentation I'd actually prepared, a complete breakdown of the $120 million fraud, every fake contract, every shell company, every offshore account. The first slide appeared on the screen, evidence of systematic financial fraud at Donovan Tech Solutions. The room went silent. Richard's smile vanished. I took a breath and began. Over the past 3 years, this company has reported $120 million in revenue from contracts with non-existent clients. These phantom companies were created to funnel money into offshore accounts controlled by CEO Richard Donovan. I clicked to the next slide showing the shell company network. That's when Richard stood abruptly and shouted, "Security, escort Ms. Rivera out immediately." 2 guards I'd never seen before entered the room as if they'd been waiting outside. They grabbed my arms, lifting me from my chair. The board members erupted in confusion, some demanding to know what was happening, others staring at the evidence still projected on the screen. I didn't fight or argue. Instead, I looked directly at Richard and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "The SEC already has everything. The whistleblower file unseals in 5 days." His face went pale. Vincent Brooks stood up, panicked. "What whistleblower file? Richard, what is she talking about?" The security guards dragged me toward the door, but I kept talking. "Check the federal court dockets. Case number SEC 2023-8847. It's all there, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence." The last thing I saw before they pulled me into the hallway was Richard's expression of absolute terror as he realized I'd beaten him. The guards escorted me out of the building, confiscated my employee badge, and informed me I was terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and attempted defamation of company leadership. I walked to my car in the visitor parking lot, got inside, and called Catherine. "It's done," I told her. "Richard just fired me in front of the entire board." She laughed. "Perfect. That's retaliation against a protected whistleblower, which is a separate federal crime. He just made everything worse. For himself." I drove home, poured a large glass of wine, and waited. The next 5 days would determine whether my 7-year career sacrifice and 3 months of secret investigation would result in justice or disaster. The termination letter arrived by courier that evening. It cited unauthorized access to confidential files, misuse of company resources, and deliberate dissemination of false information intended to damage the company's reputation. It also included a cease and desist order threatening legal action if I made any public statements. Catherine read it and smiled. "This is textbook retaliation. The SEC is going to love this." She filed an emergency motion documenting the illegal termination, which would be added to the evidence when the file unsealed. Meanwhile, Patricia texted me using our encrypted app. "Complete chaos here. Richard called emergency executive meeting after you left. He's claiming you fabricated everything and tried to stage a coup. Vincent and Tyler are panicking. Several board members are demanding independent audit." Richard refused. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. Former colleagues asking what happened, friends confused by rumors spreading through the company, even my mother calling because she'd heard I'd been fired. I couldn't tell anyone the truth yet, not until the file unsealed. So I maintained silence, letting Richard believe he'd successfully buried the scandal. That illusion lasted exactly 3 days. On January 13th, 2 days before the scheduled unsealing, Catherine called with urgent news. "The SEC is moving early," she said. "They've gathered enough evidence for immediate criminal charges. Federal agents are executing search warrants at Donovan Tech right now. The file unseals in 2 hours." I turned on the news and watched live coverage of FBI agents entering Donovan Tech headquarters carrying boxes of evidence. Employees were being evacuated, computers were being seized, and Richard Donovan was nowhere to be seen. The news anchors speculated about corporate fraud, federal investigation, and potential criminal charges. My phone rang constantly with reporters somehow getting my number, asking for comments about the explosive whistleblower case. Catherine had prepared me for this. "Say nothing until after the official unsealing," she'd instructed. "Once the file is public, we'll release a carefully worded statement." I watched the coverage for hours, seeing my former workplace swarmed by federal agents, investigators photographing documents, and executives being escorted out for questioning. Then, at exactly 2 p.m., Catherine called again. "It's unsealed. The charges are public." I pulled up the federal court website and found Case Sec 2023-8847. The complaint was now visible to anyone who searched for it. 147 pages of detailed evidence documenting how Richard Donovan had stolen $127 million through systematic fraud. The complaint named Richard as the primary defendant, with Vincent Brooks and Tyler Hamilton listed as co-conspirators. It detailed every fake contract, every shell company, every offshore account, and every board member payment. It also included my name as the primary whistleblower and Patricia Mason as the co-whistleblower who'd provided corroborating evidence. Within an hour, every major news outlet was running the story. Tech CEO charged with $127 million fraud after whistleblower exposes scheme. Former executive sealed complaint brings down Silicon Valley darling. My phone became unusable from the constant calls and messages. Catherine released our prepared statement. Ms. Rivera acted as a concerned employee who discovered evidence of serious financial crimes and reported them through proper legal channels. The fallout was immediate and devastating for Richard. By that evening, the board of directors had voted unanimously to terminate him as CEO and strip him of all company stock and benefits. Trading of Donovan Tech shares was halted as the SEC investigated the extent of investor fraud. Federal prosecutors filed criminal charges: wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The charges carried a maximum sentence of 75 years in prison. Richard's assets were frozen, including the Cayman Islands mansion, the Manhattan penthouse, and all offshore accounts. Vincent Brooks and Tyler Hamilton were also charged as co-conspirators and immediately resigned from the board. Both were cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. Patricia was praised as a courageous co-whistleblower who'd risked her career. As for me, I became the face of corporate whistleblowing overnight. Interview requests poured in from national news programs, business publications, and advocacy organizations. Catherine advised me to be selective, focusing on media outlets that would tell the story accurately without sensationalism. I agreed to 3 interviews, one with a respected business journalist, one with a financial news network, and one with a non-profit that supported whistleblowers. In each interview, I emphasized the same points: the importance of protected whistleblower channels, the courage required to report illegal activity, and the need for stronger corporate accountability. I also talked about the personal cost. I lost my career, I told the business journalist. 7 years of work, relationships with colleagues I respected. The SEC reached out through Catherine to discuss my whistleblower reward. Under federal law, whistleblowers who provide original information leading to successful enforcement actions can receive 10 to 30% of recovered funds. With $127 million in fraudulent proceeds, my potential reward ranged from $12.7 million to $38.1 million. The exact amount would be determined after all assets were recovered and legal proceedings concluded, probably taking 18 months to 2 years. This could change your life, Catherine said during our meeting to discuss the reward process. But it comes with complications. The payment will be public record. Everyone will know you received it. Some people will think you reported the fraud for money rather than principal. I'd already thought about this extensively. I reported the fraud because it was right, I told her. If the law provides financial protection for whistleblowers, I'll accept it gratefully. But the money isn't why I came forward. Meanwhile, Richard's criminal trial was scheduled for September, 8 months away. Federal prosecutors were building an airtight case using the evidence Patricia and I had provided, plus additional documents seized during the raids. Richard's legal team tried multiple strategies, claiming the money was legitimate business expenses, arguing that I'd fabricated evidence out of spite after being passed over for promotion, suggesting that Vincent and Tyler were the real masterminds while Richard was an innocent CEO who trusted the wrong people. None of it worked. The evidence was too clear, too well documented, and too damning. In March, Richard's lawyers approached prosecutors about a plea deal. They offered a guilty plea to reduce charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. Prosecutors refused. The evidence is overwhelming, the lead prosecutor told Catherine. We don't need a plea deal. We're going to trial and we're going to win. As spring arrived, I faced an unexpected challenge: rebuilding my career. My termination from Donovan Tech had been illegal retaliation, which Catherine was pursuing through a separate civil lawsuit. But that didn't change the fact that I was unemployed and, despite my whistleblower status, not particularly attractive to potential employers. Corporate finance is a small world, a former colleague explained when I asked why I wasn't getting interview callbacks. Everyone knows what you did was right, but companies are nervous about hiring whistleblowers. They worry you'll turn on them too if you find problems. It was frustrating and unfair, but I understood the reality. Instead of fighting it, I pivoted. I started consulting independently, offering financial audit services and fraud detection to smaller companies who couldn't afford large accounting firms. My whistleblower status actually helped in this context. Clients trusted that I'd find and report problems rather than hide them. The consulting work was steady and fulfilling. I helped a non-profit discover that their CFO had been embezzling funds. I identified accounting irregularities at a startup that prevented investor fraud. I created financial transparency protocols for a family business transitioning to the second generation. Each client appreciated my attention to detail and my willingness to speak uncomfortable truths. By summer, I'd built a sustainable business with more work than I could handle alone. I hired 2 junior analysts and rented a small office downtown. We specialized in fraud detection and financial integrity consulting, marketed directly to companies who valued ethics and transparency. It wasn't the prestigious corporate career I'd had at Donovan Tech, but it was honest work that made a real difference. And unlike my previous position, I wasn't working for someone else's vision. I was building something entirely my own. Richard's trial began in September with intense media coverage. I was called as the prosecution's primary witness, testifying for 2 full days about discovering the fraud, documenting the evidence, and filing the whistleblower complaint. Richard's defense attorney tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with a personal vendetta, suggesting I'd fabricated evidence after being romantically rejected by Richard. It was absurd and offensive, but I maintained my composure. I reported crimes that I discovered through my work, I stated calmly. My personal feelings about Mr. Donovan are irrelevant to the fact that he stole $127 million and created an elaborate scheme to hide that theft from investors, employees, and federal regulators. The prosecutor presented the shell company documents, the offshore account records, the fake contracts with Richard's forged signatures, and the recordings Patricia had provided of Richard discussing the fraud with Vincent and Tyler. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Richard's defense crumbled over the 3-week trial. Vincent Brooks testified against him, describing in detail how Richard had recruited him to help hide the fraud. Tyler Hamilton provided similar testimony. Patricia's recordings played in open court, Richard's voice clearly discussing the phantom contracts and routing the money offshore before anyone notices. On October 4, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts: 15 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of securities fraud, 8 counts of money laundering. Richard showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but I saw his hands shaking. Sentencing was scheduled for December. Federal guidelines suggested 40 to 50 years in prison given the amount of money involved and the sophistication of the scheme. Richard was 62 years old. He would likely die in prison. As we left the courthouse after the verdict, reporters surrounded me asking for reactions. Catherine had prepared me for this moment. Justice was served today, I said carefully. The jury saw the evidence and made the right decision. I hope this sends a message that corporate fraud will be prosecuted, and that whistleblowers who come forward will be protected and vindicated. A reporter asked if I felt satisfaction seeing Richard convicted. I thought about that question carefully before answering. I feel relieved, I said honestly. Relieved that the truth came out, that stolen money will be returned to victims, and that someone who committed serious crimes is being held accountable. This was never about personal satisfaction. It was about doing what was right. That soundbite played on news programs all evening, and I received dozens of messages from people thanking me for speaking up. The SEC finalized my whistleblower reward in November, $24.3 million, representing 19% of the recovered funds. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, enough to change my life completely. But it came with complicated feelings. I didn't do this for money, I told Catherine when she called with the news. I know, she replied gently. But the law recognizes that whistleblowers sacrifice their careers and face retaliation. This compensation acknowledges that sacrifice and incentivizes others to come forward when they discover fraud. You earned this, Sofia. I accepted that perspective. The money would provide security, allow me to expand my consulting business, and give me freedom to choose work based on impact rather than income. I donated $2 million to organizations supporting corporate whistleblowers and another $1 million to financial literacy programs for underserved communities. The rest I invested carefully, working with advisors to create long-term stability. Richard's sentencing hearing in December was brief and somber. The judge reviewed the extensive evidence, the devastating impact on investors who'd lost money when Donovan Tech stock collapsed, and the breach of trust Richard had committed. You held a position of enormous responsibility, the judge told Richard. Employees trusted you. Investors trusted you. The board trusted you. You violated that trust in the most calculated and selfish way possible, stealing millions while people who believed in your leadership lost their savings and their jobs when your crimes came to light. The judge sentenced Richard to 4 to 5 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 30 years. Vincent Brooks received 15 years. Tyler Hamilton received 12 years. All three were ordered to pay full restitution of the stolen funds plus penalties. Richard was also banned permanently from serving as an officer or director of any public company. As Richard was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he looked at me one final time. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away. He tried to silence me with intimidation and illegal termination. He'd assumed I'd be too afraid or too powerless to fight back. He'd underestimated me completely, and that miscalculation cost him everything. Outside the courthouse, I gave my final statement to the media. Today's sentencing represents accountability for serious crimes, I said. But it also represents something larger, proof that individuals can stand up to powerful people. 6 months after Richard's sentencing, I sat in my consulting firm's expanded office overlooking the city. We'd grown to 8 employees and were handling cases across the country. Companies were actively seeking us out because they wanted someone with my background ensuring their financial integrity. My former termination from Donovan Tech had become a selling point rather than a liability. "We want someone who'll actually tell us if something's wrong," one CEO told me during a consultation. "Your track record proves you'll do exactly that." Patricia had thrived in her new role at the restructured Donovan Tech, now renamed Apex Solutions after the board decided a fresh start required a complete rebrand. She'd been promoted to Vice President of Compliance. We stayed in touch, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss the surreal experience we'd shared. "Sometimes I still can't believe we actually did it," Patricia said during one of our meetings. "I was so terrified that Richard would find out and destroy us before we could expose him." I understood that fear intimately. The key was preparation, I reflected. We didn't act until we had ironclad evidence and legal protection. Rushing in without proper documentation would have been disastrous. Patricia nodded. "I've been approached by 3 other employees at different companies who discovered fraud and wanted advice. I always tell them the same thing: document everything, get a lawyer who specializes in whistleblower cases, and use the sex-protected channels." A year after the trial, I was invited to speak at a corporate governance conference about whistleblower protections and fraud detection. The audience included CFOs, board members, and compliance officers from major corporations. I talked about my experience discovering the fraud at Donovan Tech, the careful process of gathering evidence, the decision to file a sealed complaint with the SEC, and the aftermath of going public. The personal cost was significant, I acknowledged. I lost my job, my professional reputation in certain circles, and relationships with colleagues who saw me as a traitor rather than a truth teller. But the alternative was unconscionable. Staying silent would have made me complicit in ongoing crimes that were harming investors, employees, and the broader business community. I discussed the importance of creating corporate cultures where employees felt safe reporting concerns without fear of retaliation. Richard Donovan's fraud succeeded for 4 years because people were afraid to question him, I explained. Some employees noticed irregularities but didn't report them because Richard had a reputation for destroying anyone who challenged his authority. That culture of fear enabled the fraud to continue and grow. Companies need anonymous reporting channels, protection for employees who raise concerns, and leadership that genuinely values transparency over loyalty. The questions during the Q&A session were thoughtful and engaged. One CFO asked how companies could distinguish between legitimate whistleblowing and disgruntled employees making false accusations. "That's what proper investigation and documentation are for," I replied. In my case, I provided specific evidence: fake contracts, shell company records, offshore account transfers. Those weren't allegations, they were facts that could be independently verified. Good faith whistleblowing is backed by evidence, not just complaints or assumptions. As the 2nd anniversary of Richard's conviction approached, I received an unexpected call from a journalist working on a book about corporate fraud cases. She wanted to feature my story as a central case study about successful whistleblowing. "Your case represents everything that can go right when someone discovers fraud and uses the proper legal channels," she explained. "But it also shows the personal sacrifice involved and the courage required to stand up to powerful people." I agreed to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to encourage others who might be facing similar situations. Over several interviews, I walked her through the entire timeline, discovering the discrepancy, investigating quietly, consulting lawyers, filing the sealed complaint, maintaining cover while the SEC investigated, the confrontation at the board meeting, the illegal termination, and the eventual vindication when the file unsealed and charges were filed. "What was the hardest part?" the journalist asked during our final interview. I thought carefully about that question. "The isolation," I answered. For 3 months after filing the complaint, I couldn't tell anyone what I'd done. I had to act normal while knowing that everything was about to explode. The book published the following spring and became a surprise bestseller, spending 6 weeks on major lists. My story resonated particularly with professionals who'd faced ethical dilemmas in their own careers. I received hundreds of emails from people thanking me for speaking up, sharing their own experiences with workplace fraud or retaliation, and asking for advice about situations they were navigating. Some emails came from corporate executives who admitted they'd looked the other way when they noticed irregularities because they feared the consequences of reporting. "Your story made me realize that silence has consequences too," one CFO wrote. "I've since implemented new protocols at my company to make it easier for employees to report concerns anonymously." Meanwhile, Apex Solutions had completed its restructuring and was thriving under new leadership. The company had implemented some of the most aggressive fraud detection and compliance protocols in the industry, directly responding to the scandal that had nearly destroyed it. Patricia had been instrumental in designing those protocols, using lessons learned from Richard's fraud to prevent future schemes. "We review every contract with multiple independent verifiers," she explained during a panel discussion we participated in together. "No single person can approve major financial transactions without oversight. And we've created clear channels for employees to report concerns directly to the board without going through executive management first." Those seemed like obvious safeguards, but they hadn't existed under Richard's leadership. 3 years after the whistleblower file Unsealed, I was invited to testify before a congressional committee examining corporate fraud and whistleblower protections. Lawmakers were considering legislation to strengthen protections for employees who reported illegal activity and to increase penalties for companies that retaliated against whistleblowers. My testimony focused on practical recommendations based on my experience. "The sealed complaint process worked exactly as designed," I told the committee. "It protected my identity during the investigation and gave federal prosecutors time to build a strong case before Richard could hide evidence or intimidate witnesses. But the protection only works if employees know it exists and understand how to access it." I recommended mandatory training for corporate employees about whistleblower rights and protections, stronger penalties for retaliation including personal liability for executives who authorize illegal terminations, and expanded financial rewards to incentivize reporting of fraud. The legislation passed 8 months later with bipartisan support, incorporating several of my recommendations. Today, 5 years after walking out of that board meeting escorted by security guards, I run a successful consulting firm employing 15 people across multiple offices. We specialize in fraud detection, financial compliance, and corporate integrity consulting. My whistleblower reward allowed me financial independence, but more importantly, it gave me the freedom to build a business based entirely on my values. That envelope of evidence I projected on the screen didn't just expose Richard's crimes. It represented a choice I made to prioritize doing what was right over protecting my career and comfort. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply refusing to stay silent when silence would be easier.